right. Okay, welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. So this is a meeting to discuss defendant rights and what's been happening to them within our state here in Utah. And particularly, I'm going to share some experiences that I had as a delegate a few years ago. Back in 2022, I talked with several notable, now notorious politicians, namely Jason Preston, Sheriff Mike Smith, County Attorney David Levitt at the time, who was running for re-election, Jeff Gray, and some others. And what I learned from those interactions was astonishing in terms of what it revealed about what our state legislature is doing, what the Epstein files are all about, what the SRA allegations are, what's happening behind the scenes with those. And it's all very revealing. I hope you will stick around and understand these principles because they affect all of us. There's not a person that this doesn't affect. And SRA and the Epstein files is possibly going to be one of the largest conspiracy theories of all time. And so it's vitally important that we not be distracted or deluded by what is going on social media. Because just up front, I'm going to tell you it is creating a mob. And mob justice is not justice at all. And what I've learned is that the solution to these problems, as with many others that we're facing, are just hidden in our Constitution. And we need to read that document and apply it to our present circumstances. And that's how we can overcome these problems. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump in to slides here. Let me make sure, just going to do a quick video and audio check. Actually, give me a second. Make sure it's coming through. Okay. Is audio working? Okay, welcome. Cool. All right. I always want to check that. I don't have a separate machine to do this from. So, all right. Thank you for bearing with me. And let's dive into what I learned. So, I would submit that this is the most important issue. This is the thing that everyone needs to know your rights around because, like I said, this issue is coming for every single one of us. We tend to think of it as like, oh, well, I'm not planning on robbing any banks anytime soon or ever, or I didn't molest children or I didn't murder anyone, and therefore I'm good. I don't need to worry about defendant rights. And that is an incredible blind spot that is remedied by the Constitution and by the Savior's teachings. They're relevant to anybody who believes in Jesus Christ or any any good moral teacher, but particularly our Savior. So but we're going to go through this, and I'm just going to talk through this in terms of first principles so that anybody can understand it. This is my aim here. If anything is at all unclear, or you want me to flesh out a point, answer a question, that's what this meeting is for. And so you can drop your questions in the live stream chat on YouTube and on Zoom. Um, but it boils down to this question of defendant rights has everything to do with how much do you trust your government? Do you trust them with power to execute people? Do you trust them with power to find people? Do you trust them with power to accuse people of really racy things? What is it that you do and don't trust your government to do? And this is vital because we've actually forgotten the most important check on government power. And it's something that the founding fathers understood very deeply and very keenly, and they might not have anticipated even just how drastically we would underappreciate these things, just how much we could get brainwashed into abandoning our rights and letting our government take on the roles of judge, jury, and executioner. So remember that for this. And I always like to ask this question up front, just how intact do you think our Constitution is on this point of criminal justice and defendant rights? You know, you have your county attorney candidates and your sheriff candidates. So this video is in part tailored to delegates who are going to be vetting these candidates and voting for them at the Utah County Convention this coming Saturday. So, yeah, what defendant rights are they like 50%, 80%? Just because our government, at least the Republican Party, is saying, oh, we're going to be tough on crime. We're going to go nail them to the wall. We're going to get rid of the drug addicts. We're going to get crime off our streets and stuff like that. But how much can you really trust them with that? And how much are these checks and balances that prevent abuse of power actually in place? It's much narrower than you think. But if you want to just pause, write down an estimate or blurt it out or say, what's your mental estimate? Um, I can quantify this, by the way. It's only as intact as our ability to resist. So here's one of the questions. When the government comes after you, they want to fine you for something, they want to accuse you of something, they want to prevent you from doing something, they want to force you to do something. How strong is your ability to resist that? In our modern era, I think even the people with the really rosy concept of government will admit that our ability to resist our own government is frankly close to zero. So much so that a lot of people will say, you just don't go against your government ever. You never question them, you never oppose them. But what's distracted us from our ability to oppose the government is the fact that we have this party system. Right now, it's mainly a two-party system where there's this false sense of security that we get because we think our party's got it covered. They're going after the bad guys. That is not the case. It is a complete delusion. It is a lie that our government's kept in check by parties. The opposite is true. The government has been let loose with free rein to do whatever it wants and concentrate power and trammel the people's rights because of the party system. That's something where you're going to want to watch my videos on election methods. I did one this last week and doing one next week as well. But we're going to need to learn a lot more about that. So this is from my own personal experience, as well as observing many others who have been victimized by our criminal justice system. What you have pictured here is a judge and a prosecutor, and here's this defendant, like he's cornered in a back alley kind of a thing. And the typical courtroom illusion is that the judge and the prosecutor are uh, impartial, neutral, third parties, basically just administrators of justice, and they're just there to help you out, basically, by just making sure the law is applied. That's not the case at all. When a certain something is missing from this courtroom, there's a hint in this picture here. If you want to try to call it out, notice what is missing from this picture in terms of criminal justice. Okay, I'm going to go on. We're going to talk about what's missing. So this is extremely important. This has everything to do with everything in government because criminal justice is where the rule of law gets enforced. If you don't have criminal justice, if there were no criminal courts, if the government couldn't come after you and say, hey, you broke the law, we're going to punish you for breaking the law, then the rule of law would have no weight. It would have no meaning. They'd have no teeth. And people would just ignore the government because it's just, oh, that's nice advice, right? Pay your taxes or else, right? Go get a driver's license or else, right? Uh, Follow this mandate or else, right? And so everything comes down to this use of power. Everything comes down to, yes, people with guns who will throw you in prison if you disobey them or if you cross them, or they'll break your ribs or whatever, because they want to get their way, right? And so that's extremely dangerous, a power for anybody to wield. And so we've got to make sure we have the best and strongest checks and balances against that. But where we've been extremely naive, where we've been totally duped on this whole issue, is in outsourcing the entire process of criminal justice to our government. And where that happens, you have a police state. So this is what's behind SRA and the Epstein files. So anytime you're accused of breaking the law, the whole checks and balances and separation of powers argument completely collapses because it's all three branches of government versus you. You have the legislature, and it's their laws that you're accused of breaking. There's a judge, and the judge is supposed to apply the law to your situation, and the prosecutor has accused you of breaking the law, and he's part of the executive branch. So it's all three branches versus you. They have no incentive to work against each other. They have no incentive to check each other. The only thing they could possibly be afraid of in that room is you, but since it's three versus one and they have your tax dollars and they have guns and you don't, and you could be like in a jumpsuit, a jail jumpsuit and handcuffed or whatever, they're not very afraid of you. Nothing on earth can possibly make them afraid of you enough to actually uphold your rights and act as a check against each other's wrongdoings, except one thing. There's only one thing on earth that can make them afraid enough to do that. And one could argue, well, oh, fear is an inferior motivator. They should be motivated by love and duty and compassion to like take good care of you. And let's just hope that they don't abuse power. I'm sorry, but that's the worst argument ever. If you think that way, um, I'm sorry. I don't have very smooth words for you, but you need to take it back to nursery basically and learn the basics of existence on this human populated earth where people fall into corruption very easily, especially when they're tempted with vast amounts of power or even small amounts of power. People will do very corrupt things unless there are structural checks against them to prevent them from doing it. So you can't just rely on the goodwill of a prosecutor or a judge or the legislature to be kind to you and uphold your rights and let you off easy or whatever. That value system just does not work. I'm sure it's possible to have good people in government, but it's rare. It's extremely rare. So don't bank on that. You need actual checks and balances that are forceful. So one of the things I'm going to tell you about here is about how I've interviewed actually these candidates, one of whom is up for re-election on Saturday in the nominating convention for the Republican Party in Utah County. This is Sheriff Mike Smith up at the top. And this down here is then County Attorney David Levitt, who was the incumbent in 2022, and he was up for re-election. And yeah, it got really weird really fast. I talked to both of these guys, got their views on defendant rights and the issues, the questions that I'm about to pose here to you. So delegates, I'm hoping you will take note because these are, in my opinion, and I believe in the founding fathers' opinion, the most important issues and questions that you could possibly raise to these guys. So you could monkey with the wording on the questions, but the principles behind them are extremely important. They matter more than anything else. So question number one. So there were three candidates for the county attorney's office. And so these first two questions were aimed primarily at the county attorney candidates. And so this, as a delegate, I went around and I said, how do you feel about plea deals and pretrial diversions? Because I knew enough about plea deals to know that they're slimy. I'd never personally participated in or witnessed very directly much of the criminal justice process. But I knew that, plea deals are wrong because I have a conscience. I have a brain. I can read. I can reason through things. And if plea deals are just extortion, I can explain a little bit more about plea deals right here in the background, but I want to give you an idea of some of these exchanges that I had. So I went around. So it was Jeff Gray versus David Levitt, the incumbent, and Jeff Gray is now he's our current county attorney in Utah County, and there was one other candidate. And um, so I asked these candidates this question: how do you feel about plea deals? And Jeff Gray and the other were both. They said you basically need plea deals because otherwise you're going to overwhelm the system. And yeah, they're a necessary part of the system, and because we got to be efficient, right? So there's this efficiency argument. If that sounds familiar on the national stage, that's because it does. So pay very, very close attention to that argument, efficiency, and anything else that is used, advanced, deployed to try to avoid constitutional safeguards. I'm just going to tell you my encounter with Jeff Gray on the subject. I had some conversations with others, and I was learning. I was reading in the Constitution, and I was like, okay, let's apply these rules here. So the United States Constitution, the Utah Constitution, as well, has a lot of these same provisions and safeguards in it. But on one occasion, at an event, I asked county attorney candidate Jeff Gray. Well, I said trial by jury is in the Constitution. It requires it because this was my part of my response or rebuttal to his claim that you need plea deals, and his argument was that trial by jury is discretionary because you could cite the Sixth Amendment, which says you shall have the right to trial by jury. But then I pointed him to Article 3, Section 2, Clause 3 in the United States Constitution, which says the trial of all crimes except in cases of impeachment shall be by jury. So there's a shall right there. It's not discretionary, it's mandatory. And I have a lot more that I can say about that. And he told me when I said the trial of all crimes shall be by juries in the Constitution, he said it does not say that. And so I pulled it out and I showed it to him, and his jaw dropped. He didn't have any more words for me after that. And so this is the guy who's administering and overseeing criminal justice as the chief prosecutor in Utah County, while we have all these SRA allegations and stuff going on. Do you trust him to faithfully discharge the duties of that office, given that he apparently did not know that our United States Constitution requires trial by jury in all criminal cases? And the Utah Constitution is not an exception to that. It also requires trial by jury in every criminal case. And I actually have experience now in the criminal justice system appealing a criminal case that was pointed at me. And I've run into these landmines that have been planted by our ignorance of these truths that are in the Constitution. So I'll get more into plea deals to try to explain the backdrop for those who are not familiar with that. But I'm just going to finish going over these questions for now. And we'll explain them as we go as well. Question number 2, will you implement trial by jury in 100% of criminal cases? So this is the corollary to that, just to say you need to have trial by jury all the time. That's what our Constitution requires. That's literally your duty. And it's not that hard to learn one's duty in judicial and executive proceedings in criminal justice settings, because this is that clause that I cited to you. It's in Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution, which has to do with the judiciary, and it occupies a single page. Like, it's a single page of text, guys. Like, you can read this. This is accessible for ordinary people to read and understand. And most notably, like, there are things that it says are mandatory, and there are a lot of things that the judiciary does that are not in there. And that's important too, because that means they're not authorized to do those things. And so this is actually the key to stopping judicial overreach as well. So I asked them this question, and for the most part with these candidates, again, I did not get favorable responses to this question, which obviously means that they're not adequately, that they don't understand our Constitution, and therefore they're not going to apply it, right? This is a no-brainer. You don't vote for somebody who doesn't even understand the duties of his office, or isn't going to apply what the Constitution requires there, or if he's not open to it. Somebody at the convention after Jeff Gray got the nomination, he said to me, "Well, maybe he can learn," and I said, "I hope so." Right? I hope so. So yeah, this is anyway. So Jeff Gray moved on from the nomination. But you'd hope that they'd learn. And it's been how long? And granted, I haven't been badgering him all the time, but this is part of the reason why I'm raising this publicly, is because your life is actually in jeopardy. Your freedom is imperiled by the ignorance of your county attorney on this point. So you really need to make sure you get this right. Okay, and on the point of trial by jury, David Leavitt, the incumbent, he was for re-election, as I mentioned, and he talked up trial by jury. He actually astonished me because he was the last of the 3 candidates that I interviewed. And I asked my question about plea deals, and so how do you feel about plea deals? And he said, they're horrible. And I was like, really? Really? You're an actual politician and you're currently in office and you think plea deals are terrible? Tell me more, right? And so he talks it up. He says, yeah, the trial by jury is in the Constitution. I'm like, yeah, I'm tracking. Okay. Yeah, it's mandatory. Oh, okay, cool. Good. So then our conversation moved to, okay, how do we get there? And I was astonished and impressed by what David Leavitt had to say about trial by jury and plea deals, because the other candidates were not willing to do that much. But this is where he and I split. Is he said, well, okay, so I have this pretrial diversion program that I've been implementing, and this was actually, and he said, this is how we get to trial by jury, is by doing pretrial diversions. And I'm like, I don't think so. I really don't think so. I don't think you get closer to protecting people's rights by continuing to deny those rights or creating new instruments for denying those rights. And one of the allegations against David Leavitt was he was soft on crime and so on. And that's what the pretrial diversion program had done. And Sheriff Mike Smith was against him on that. And Jeff Gray was probably not the biggest fan of it either. But here's a question. If that were the case, then why are we still doing the pretrial diversion programs under Jeff Gray? If they're so bad, if there's actually friction between them, then why don't we just dismantle those things instead of only giving lip service? Why don't we actually get around to restoring trial by jury? And so all three of the candidates actually didn't restore trial by jury, and pretrial diversions are just kind of a fancy name for an arguably even more pernicious and more mandatory version of plea deals. Because if it's diversion, it's pretrial, so you're not even getting a trial and you're getting diverted away from trial, then you're not having trial by jury and you're not actually getting real justice. So none of these candidates actually supported trial by jury, despite David Levitt's lip service to it. And so this is a key. And this is the key issue that underpins the whole SRA allegations and the whole Epstein files issue. If you don't understand this and how it works and why it's so important to have a trial by jury, you need to have that. One more question. This is also very Epstein and SRA centric right here. I had this question for the sheriff. I said, will you execute a summons for a grand jury to hear criminal complaints? Will you allow a grand jury to convene? And historically, at least in semi-recent history, it's been a judge or a panel of judges, at least here in Utah, that has gatekept the grand jury. And they're actually really, they really don't want an actual impartial citizen grand jury to convene or to recognize or exercise its constitutional powers. And here's the reason. It's because a grand jury has power to investigate and prosecute anyone, including public officials who are suspected of corruption, including the Epstein files guys and whoever is accused of SRA, right? So it should be a grand jury that is investigating those things. And this is provided for in our own Constitution. It's in the Fifth Amendment. And this is one of the reasons why I did a separate video on this about how the Miranda rights / Fifth Amendment rights is such a it's a bad smokescreen to try to prevent people from discovering grand juries, which are also just conveniently buried hidden in the Fifth Amendment, but no one ever notices or talks about them hardly, except again in these high profile federal criminal cases where they've stacked the jury or something like that, or where it's just, just for show. So trial by jury and grand juries usually only appear anymore just in these high profile televised cases to try to give us, we the people, some kind of assurance that this constitutional feature still exists and is still being exercised somewhere, even though in practice, in the vast majority of cases, like 99+% of cases, it never even gets to them. They've bound and gagged the juries and they've thrown them in the dungeon. That's exactly what's happened. So this is vitally important if you actually want to prosecute corrupt officials. We never needed Doge, for example, because a grand jury can actually investigate stuff and they can find out who's doing fraud and they can prosecute actual fraud. That's how you do it. That's the constitutional safeguard there. And it's really important because at least a couple of reasons. The text of the Fifth Amendment says that no person shall be held to answer for an capital or otherwise infamous crime except on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. So that's an extremely important thing that we're about to see played out in the history between these politicians here. But what that means is that the government can't even accuse you of doing something egregious like Epstein files or SRA type stuff. They can't even accuse you of doing that without the consent of a grand jury. And the grand jury is made up of it's a rotating panel of, so they're not like permanent government, they're not part of the government, they're not government employees or anything like that. But this is just people like you and me who weigh these cases, investigate, and if they decide that there's enough evidence, aka probable cause of a certain set of allegations, because they've heard the witnesses and they've heard the evidences, they have access to do that, then they issue a bill, right? That's a presentment or an indictment. The difference between a presentment and indictment is that the presentment is that the grand jury is acting on its own volition. They don't need permission from anyone in government to give a presentment. For an indictment, that's issued by a prosecutor, but then the grand jury has to agree. So what that means is we should not be hearing anything about like criminal charges or accusations on the part of the government against anyone of any infamous crime, anything that could be used to like damage someone's reputation, like you did some dirty, rotten, malicious thing, some felonious thing, then you have to have a grand jury sign off on it first. They have to agree that there's probable cause. That's how you make that determination that there's probable cause sufficient to take it to trial. Where the burden of evidence is different in the trial because the trial jury has to determine that the individual is guilty as charged beyond reasonable doubt, and that it is moral and ethical and constitutional to proceed with the conviction and sentencing. That's the role of the jury. So you can see how many safeguards there are here. It safeguards people's reputations. It safeguards them against these horrible proceedings and so on. Question: is our government following this at all on either side? Because this is a two-edged sword. It's a sword and a shield, right? It's a shield against these felonious complaints against you. If there's not enough, if there's not truth to them, or there's not enough evidence, then no, they don't get to accuse you of that. They don't get to damage your reputation just by slinging around these horrendous allegations. But then it's also a sword because you can go after corrupt officials and you can prosecute them, right? So we, the people, have been disarmed, functionally and practically speaking. Our shield, our primary shield, trial by jury, has been taken away. Our sword and shield, grand jury, have also been taken away. And this is where I get with Sheriff Mike Smith, and he said he didn't really know a whole lot about grand juries or how they're supposed to work and so on. And I'm like, I believe you. I'm just learning. But will you please learn about that? And so that's what I asked him when he was running for office 4 years ago. And it's very troubling to me that a sheriff wouldn't know like very much about grand juries. And he actually proved later in the year that he did not know how a grand jury is supposed to operate because of this exchange that he had, this delightful exchange. Later in that same year, David Leavitt was on the general election ballot, and I think it was September 30th timeframe, I think, of 2022, sometime in there. Mike Smith makes this public announcement that David Leavitt is being investigated with charges of satanic ritual abuse, SRA, and cannibalism. And he assured the public that this was not this is not a politicized allegation. It's just, of course, yes, we're investigating him, right? But if that had been true, if there were a grand jury that was investigating these guys, then David Leavitt in particular, then that investigation was botched, because grand jury investigations and deliberations are supposed to be secret, because otherwise you don't have that protection of a person's reputation, saying, hey, this is how you protect people's reputations against awful stuff. You need that grand jury to act as a firewall there to say, we're going to wait until there's enough evidence, right? And this is why you do need to actually go to a grand jury and testify. If you've been a victim of X, Y, or Z, you need to go to a grand jury and testify. And that grand jury can't be kept on the government's leash. They can't be spoon-fed instructions like trial juries are today. But yeah, our government keeps grand juries under lock and key. And they work hard to stack those juries too. So honestly, I don't trust what comes out even of grand juries or trial juries today. That's unfortunate because it's not the institution, it's not the principle that's at fault there. It's the fact that we let go of these powers, we let go of these rights and these checks and balances, and now they're exclusively in the hands of our government, to where they can gatekeep pretty much everything and still let the cat out of the bag. That's, oh, there's this investigation going on. And this is one of the ways that you can tell that this is just public credential right here, is to say, well, did the grand jury issue an indictment or a presentment? Did they bring criminal charges against them? You can't just say, oh, they're investigating, because that is definitive political weaponization of an alleged investigation or accusation against someone, right? And to be totally fair, any private citizen could totally get up and say, hey, that person raped me or something like that, right? They could totally do that. But it's the grand jury that actually decides whether there's probable cause enough to take it to trial. And there are worlds of difference too between some Yahoo on the internet or somebody you once knew or whatever who accuses you of some nasty thing versus like an official, government approved or grand jury approved criminal charge coming at you. So yeah, worlds of difference in terms of reputational harm. And so unfortunately, regrettably, David Leavitt and the other candidates showed that they were not in line with our Constitution because they did not truthfully support trial by jury in practice. And our county sheriff, Mike Smith, was also not supportive of grand juries in the sense that when there was an infamous allegation out there, okay, you just let the cat out of the bag, okay? But yeah, so that's not appropriate to do. You don't do that. If you're the sheriff, you're anybody in law enforcement, anybody on the prosecutorial side, and you have awareness that this is going on. The grand jury, by the way, doesn't even owe it to you to let you know if you're in government that someone's being investigated. But yeah, you don't do that. You don't do that because that ruins the integrity of the grand jury process, and it ruins that protection, that safeguard that's supposed to be in place against these false or unsubstantiated allegations being made against someone for the purpose of reputational harm. And so, yeah, it's just really not plausible to say that this is not a politicized accusation. You just don't do that. Yeah, and even if someone else brings it up and says, "Are you doing this?" We don't owe you anything, right? And this is a key because one of the questions that I did have, it was kind of a hot topic at the time, was there was this falling out between Mike Smith and David Levitt saying these offices don't work together well and there's contention and stuff. And I'm like, okay, tell me more about that, right? What's the contention? Oh, we can't act as a check on the county attorney. I'm like, okay. And David Levitt told me how to act as a check on the county attorney, at least in part, trial by jury. That's true. You can act as a check on the county attorney through trial by jury, but also grand juries. Because here's one question. How would you investigate or prosecute your county attorney, or your state attorney general, or how do you prosecute a prosecutor, right? Is there any provision for doing that in our government? Yes, there is in the Constitution. A citizen grand jury can investigate a corrupt county attorney for criminal wrongdoing, and they can issue a presentment against him and file criminal charges, which immediately kickstarts the process of speedy public trial by jury. And no one in the government can tell them no. Like there's literally the power does not exist. It is not enumerated, it's not granted, it's not delegated anywhere in our state or national constitution to say you can do that. Okay, state constitution, they did brag about dismantling grand juries for the most part. But that's not pursuant to that's not within the rights. This is not something we should let go of. Okay, so plea deals. Let's dive into this a little bit. Everybody needs to understand how the plea bargaining process works. I do owe you a future message on pretrial diversions, just because those are becoming popularized. But plea deals, I want you to ask this question: what rights are injured in a plea deal setting? So you're accused of violating the law. Let's use some recent memory here. You violated curfew. You gathered in a group that was more than 10 people during a pandemic. How dare you? Or you weren't wearing a mask or something like that. So now there are these criminal charges being brought against you by the city or the county or the state or the federal government or something like that, whoever, right? And so you're at this arraignment, this pretrial hearing. Why are there pretrial hearings? You just have a trial, speedy public trial. There's no provision for a pretrial hearing in our Constitution. Just to be super clear there too. But I'll just explain how it's happened to me, how it's happened to others that I've seen. So I've seen this so many times. This is standard operating procedure in our criminal justice system. You get accused of speeding or not wearing a mask or something, and the judge says, well, we've got this really nice prosecutor here. Don't you want to take some time alone in a room with this prosecutor and just see if you can work something out? See, the prosecutor's here to help you. Okay, are you buying that? Are you buying that? The prosecutor is the one who's filing charges against you, pressing charges, right? So, well, how is the prosecutor my friend? The prosecutor is not my friend. The prosecutor is, by definition, by structure, by nature, in that setting, he's my adversary. And you're telling me to go alone in a back room somewhere behind closed doors with my adversary. And I'm like, no. Let's do this in public. Let's do this all out in public so everyone can see what's going on. That's vital. So there should be keywords coming from the Bill of Rights right now to your mind about what happens in these plea deal settings. But I'll just describe one. Um, so the judge says, you want to meet with the prosecutor? And if you do, then the prosecutor will say something like this. We know you're guilty. We got you. We got all the details on you. We got all the facts. Got the body cam or the dash cam or the speeding cam or whatever. We know you ran the red light. We know that you weren't wearing a mask. We have witnesses. We know you were gathering with too many people, whatever, right? But you know what? You're such a nice person. I'm going to cut you a deal. The fine for this is ordinarily 800 bucks. But since you're such a good person, I'm sure you won't do this again. Um, I'll cut it down to $400 fine. We'll only fine you. We'll only charge you at a level that you can get away with just being fined $400, just a pinprick, no biggie. As long as you just admit that you did it, or just say no contest. It's another thing you can do. Just say no contest. And so you're left with this decision. You're like, well, wait, what do I do? I'm either facing an $800 fine or a $400 fine. What should I do? And for most people, they kind of think they're scared. They don't even know what legalese they just got thrown at them by the judge and by the prosecutor. Like, I don't even know what this is. But the judge is the facilitator for the prosecutor to extort a plea deal from you. So plea deals violate the Fifth, the Sixth, and the Eighth Amendments. They violate the Fifth Amendment because you're being compelled to witness against yourself. That's prohibited in our Fifth Amendment. You can't be compelled to witness against yourself. Anybody who asks you, go ahead, just say you're guilty. That's prohibited. That's outlawed. Like, that's not according to the rule of law. So, and then, and it's on penalty of a cruel or unusual punishment or excessive fine, violating the Eighth Amendment, which the legislature, by the way, bakes in excessive fines and cruel and unusual punishments into practically every law because they know that the prosecutor is going to try to extort a plea deal. Plea deals also injure the Sixth Amendment because you're being denied a speedy public trial by an impartial jury of your peers. That's what they're designed to circumvent. So there's like literally nothing from the actual criminal justice procedure mandated in our Constitution that is actually intact under this system. None of it actually happens. And you can go all the way back to the Fourth Amendment with warrantless searches and so on. We'll do more of a deep dive on that tonight as I go over the bills from the Utah legislature. And, Fifth Amendment, not supposed to be compelled to witness against yourself. This is the theme, that the Bill of Rights has everything to do, Amendments 4 through 8 have everything to do with defendant rights. In other words, protecting people who are suspected, accused, or convicted of a crime or other wrongdoing. Why are those there? If we just want to be tough on crime, if we just want to like prosecute, have a 100% conviction rate, like certain communist nations are really, really close to, or empires, is that what we want? Do we just want efficiency? Just like these county attorney candidates said, is their top priority, right? In essence, because that's their top priority if they're not granting trial by jury. But our Constitution wasn't designed to secure efficiency. If you wanted an efficient government, then you just appoint a dictator for life and you say, okay, you make all the decisions for us because that's efficient. Because then we don't have to think about anything. We don't have to do anything. You just come after us and you come and extort us, you rape, pillage, and you plunder to your heart's content. Okay, all right, that's an efficient government. That's the Department of Government Efficiency for you. That is where we're moving at light speed by but both the federal and the state governments. That's where they're going. So plea deals categorically unconstitutional, and you're being fined basically for exercising your right. If you say I want a trial by jury, or even just I want a trial at all, I want out of this ridiculous plea bargaining scenario, they're saying okay, well we'll keep our charges high then. And then you get a bench trial because in a lot of instances anyway, they're not even allowing you to gain access to a jury. And there are a lot of really ridiculous shenanigans that they're deploying to do that. This book, I highly recommend it. It's by Suja Thomas. It's called The Missing American Jury. And you can find it on her website. You can find it on Amazon. Really fantastic read. In this book, she highlights how about 1% of criminal cases were tried by a jury. This is like 10 plus years ago now, pre-pandemic. 1% of criminal cases and 1% of civil cases, both nationally and at the state level on average, 1% or less in many, if not most jurisdictions. Like, and so to the point where it's like, these practically don't exist anymore. Like it's only for show where they do exist. And it's because of plea deals. It's because of these pretrial diversions and so on the criminal side. And on the civil side, they do differently named shenanigans, but they have the same effect. So I decided that I was going to challenge this because I read the Founding Fathers. I consider trial by jury as the only anchor ever yet imagined by man by which a government can be held to the principles of its constitution. That's Thomas Jefferson. So I appealed the criminal case. I got pulled over for a traffic stop because my automobile insurance auto pay app that had failed. And so we'd had these various run-ins and so on. And so I was pulled over on this one occasion because I was driving without insurance. Because I said, okay. So this officer ran my plate. He said, well, you're driving without insurance. How did you figure that out? Well, I ran your license plate number against a private company's database. Like, is that constitutional? Is that legal? Is that ethical? So I said, okay, I don't see any reason for that law, so I'm going to challenge it. So I went through this process where I was being now stared down by all three branches of government over this insurance mandate and several other regulations that break if you don't buy this supposedly private company's insurance. And I had this experience for myself to where, okay, all right, here's a judge, here's a prosecutor. Let's see how this rule of law thing really works in practice. Let's see how the rubber hits the road. Are they really impartial? Are there checks and balances because of the separation of powers? So I highly advise you to gain experience, find someone who's gone through this before and learn from their experiences, compare notes. Like if we don't do this, then this is going to happen to us and we're not going to know what to do. And when I say this is going to happen to us, I'm not saying that literally every person is going to be like charged criminally, but the likelihood of that is increasing drastically, in part on account of a lot of these special levers and trapdoors that they're installing through the state legislature, the police state, to be able to prosecute you at any time and make you disappear forever if they want, just because they don't like you. They don't like what you have to say. They don't want your voice to be heard. So we need to speak up now. Now is the time. Now is the time to speak up. And we're actually running really, really late. We're behind schedule in terms of preserving defendant rights because of how far gone they already are. But one other experience I have had, you see on the left, there's this judge here, and in the pretrial hearings, and I've been a witness to, the judges have consistently like tried to monitor the environment and prevent this venue from being too publicized. They don't want what they're doing to defendants to be published. For example, there's this little thing that makes you warns you that if you record any of these proceedings or publish them anywhere, that you can be criminalized. I'm like, sorry, this is a public record. This is a public proceeding. You can't do that. And I've seen this happen so many times, it's not even funny, that there'll be some defendant behind a smartphone or a computer or something, laptop, in their kitchen or living room or something like that, because they do almost all these proceedings remotely anymore, ever since the pandemic, at least. And the judge is like barking at the individuals. Is there anyone else in the room there with you? And they're like, pick up your laptop or your phone and like show us the 360 of your room to make sure that no one else is there with you. Why would they want to do that? I've seen that a lot. And there was one time where there's this woman who was charged over something, this pretrial hearing, and she's like, the judge and the prosecutor just kind of barking these extortionary orders and instructions at her, and what do you want to do? And not explaining the legal terms sufficiently so that an ordinary person really could understand the consequences. They give token explanations, but she's just kind of like looking off screen to her husband who's there, and he's like, "You're not supposed to talk to anybody. You're not allowed to talk to anybody. You're not allowed to have anyone in the room with you." And it's like, what the heck? Like, sorry, excuse me, but what does our Constitution say about that? You can't deny anyone the assistance of counsel. And also, assistance of counsel can be anyone they choose. There's no prohibition. They don't have to be like a licensed lawyer or bar certified or anything like that. That's unconstitutional. And those who do it, I'm sorry, but they're destroying themselves. They're destroying our society. They're destroying civilization, and they're destroying themselves. And there's so many, not all lawyers, thankfully, but like a lot of lawyers and judges, And educators even will bark at you just like that judge barked at that lady, and they barked at almost everyone who goes in that process and questions those proceedings. But they'll bark at you and they'll gaslight you to no end, it seems, over this, saying you're not allowed to have anyone's help once you're in here. You're in our clutches. You must do as we say, but I promise you that we're friendly and we're going to help you out. We're gonna do what you need, right? So in my case, I just went ahead and immediately demanded a speedy public trial because I want these proceedings to be public. We need to shine a light on what our government is doing to people. You actually need to love your enemy, right? So I said I demand a trial, and the judge says trial by jury, and so the judge says she immediately turned to the prosecutor and she said, "Do you have anything to say about that?" And without hesitation, the prosecutor says, "Your Honor, I move to amend the charges to infractions." Now, there's this clever statute in Utah's law that says no trial by jury shall be had in case of an infraction. So if you claim your rights, prosecutor pulls this lever in conspiracy with the judge, and you fall down this trap door. The trap door is you don't get to shine a light on this. You don't get to have an impartial body actually make the government prove its case or decide the verdict. We get to decide your guilt. And there's no one here to help you. And so that's how they do it. They've amended the Constitution by statute. So the state legislature is complicit. They've amended the Constitution without amending it. This is how they work. This is how they do it. So you have all three branches of government. This is the proof. There's abundant proof. All three branches are conspiring together. And if you ask for the assistance of counsel, say, I want to have, a public defender, then what the judge will do is he'll whip out this book and he'll be like, okay, all right, I'll make you fill out this form. So they used to use books, now they use digital forms, but I'm going to make you answer all these embarrassing questions about how much money you make and about your expenses. And I think they don't even fully take into account expenses because you could have like, I've heard it happen quite a number of times. Somebody's got like, oh, I've got to pay, like, child support. I've got to pay this. I've got to pay that. And so, but just based on some like, federal poverty level guidance kind of thing, they'll be like, after this embarrassment, this humiliation of how little money you make, like, well, you make too much money for us to give you a lawyer. And then the defendant's like, but I can't afford one. You guys have priced them beyond my reach, and I can't afford one. And so it's like, okay, it's too bad, so sad. So they pretend to grant you that right, but they don't really actually let you exercise it. And they don't let you talk to other people. They don't let you have someone else there with you. And this has gotten even worse with HB 260, which we're going to go over tonight, which prevents you from having, which would criminalize anyone from helping you in any legal setting, just about, if they're not a bar certified attorney. So the whole key here is isolation. They're trying to isolate you. They don't want you to have a real defender. They don't want you to have real assistance of counsel that's not a part of their government secret conspiracy. But also the jury box. Look in the background of this picture. The jury box is empty. And the public seats are also empty. So and this is by design, if they can isolate you, then it's you versus Goliath. And so I'm here to arm and equip you against Goliath because they don't have a right to do any of that stuff to you. And if we don't know our rights, we're going to just have them taken away. And they're still going to try hard to take away our rights anyway. So I could pretend I could put that fake disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. I'm just telling you what's true. And they can't criminalize telling the truth. If they do that, they'll have openly announced which side of truth in the Constitution they're on. So in my case, one other detail here, I did show up in person for the bench trial, which was scheduled. So the judge and the prosecutor conspired to deny me a trial by jury. So I showed up in person to the courtroom on the day of the bench trial. Bench trial is when a judge is just deciding your case all by himself or herself. So I show up to the courtroom and it's empty. There's like no one there. I'm like, oh, public trial. I'd invited people to my trial. I was kind of like giddy about it a little bit. Might seem silly, but I was like, come to my trial, come to my trial. Because we don't anymore. Nobody shows up to public trials because there aren't any, hardly. Like they don't even hold them. And here's part of the little corroborating factor here. I show up in person. Eventually, the judge comes into the room with the recorder, and the judge gives me this really weird look. And she's like, "You shouldn't be here." And I'm like, "Really? I'm on trial today, am I not?" And she's like, "No, no, no, no. We're doing this remotely by WebEx. You go back home and you go get on your computer, okay?" And she was polite about it and everything. But I'm just like, really? Really? I'm not allowed to show up to our courtroom for my own trial? This is weird. This is really weird. And part of the reason for that is you'll notice as you try to gain access to these hearings, even the ones that are supposed to be public hearings, okay, where's the WebEx link? Where do I find it? Is it published anywhere? Are they announcing this? Are they summoning the public? Have they published their docket in a way that no, like you can find it perhaps, but they bury it. They don't invite the public. How is it a public hearing if no one even knows it exists? No one even I didn't even know until the day of my trial when I was already there sitting in the courtroom waiting for the judge that like, oh, I'm not oh, the trial venue is elsewhere. Oh, you okay, that's convenient. Why was I not informed of the location of my own trial, right? So, but this happens all the time. This is the way they do business anymore. It's just this transaction online, digitally, in this virtual environment with no one else in the room with you. And whenever, it's just you and the prosecutor, you and the judge and the prosecutor. You have no assistance counsel, no jury, nobody from the public there, usually. And they just do them in batches in the pretrial hearings, and then the actual trial, you might get some time to yourself with the judge and prosecutor. So it's you versus the wolves. But that's how they operate. That's what happens here. And everybody needs to be aware of this. And all the various other shenanigans that they use to entrench corruption of the entire uniparty in government. So I can say more about my case, but I did end up petitioning it all the way to, I appealed it to the Utah Court of Appeals, and they affirmed the conviction without even touching our Constitution. They didn't even mention it. And I appealed that to the Utah State Supreme Court, and they just didn't grant cert. I petitioned for a writ of certiorari, which is a newer thing. It's not original to our constitutional ethic, really, because I can go more into that too, but I can walk you through the appeals process, and I probably owe you a separate video on how that works. But let me just say, trial by jury is so important. The reason why I was insistent that there be a jury is because the law in question was unconstitutional, and the judge was biased, and I didn't have the assistance of counsel, and it was just the government versus me. It was my own tax dollars fighting against me, like my own fist punching me in the face. And the public needs to be there to see that happen. And it's not an accident that our Constitution uses that shall language, that the trial of all crimes shall be by jury. That's mandatory. And we need the ability to hold our government to account for when they don't. And if you're on a jury, if the government actually lets a jury convene, this might be an oversight, if you will, in our original Constitution, in that how do you restore trial by jury once it's taken away? How do you protect it when it's been threatened? And the answer is that there are a lot of steps. There are a lot of gradual erasures and attacks on all of these checks and balances that have happened over time. And the only way we can restore our Constitution is by undoing those things, and then by strengthening those checks and balances, adding additional checks and balances that would prevent this from ever happening again. That's our roadmap. That's where we got to get to. That's why I'm highlighting just how vital this is. The jury is the trunk of the tree of liberty. The branches are merely branches. And for some reason, almost everyone in our country now subscribes to the theory that, well, whatever the government says just goes. You can't say no to the government. The jury can say no to government. This is the point, right? So jury or juror, juror means one who has taken an oath. Jury means oath. So a juror makes an oath. Verdict means true saying. So a juror makes an oath to tell the truth, right? Or to deliver a true saying, a true status for the accused. Judge comes from Latin justitior, which means to say according to law, right? So that's the role of the judge, to say what the law is. Okay, I can tell you what the law is, right? But importantly, there's no prohibition in our Constitution against the jury nullifying the law. So let's say it's one of those bad laws, mask mandate, curfew, gathering restrictions, what have you, insurance mandates. You're accused of any of those things. What recourse do you have? If you don't have a jury, then you have practically none. That's why people have such a hopeless aspect on criminal justice in our country anymore, is because if you don't have trial by jury, then you never get the chance to talk to a reasonable, impartial body to, number one, make the government prove its case, and number two, nullify bad laws. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about why making the government prove its case is so important. Is because this is where the Epstein files and the SRA allegations come in, right? So without trial by jury, if it's just judges deciding this stuff, or if they can stack the jury panel the way they want it, there's this very important principle of voir dire, which is the ability of the jury to vet itself. There's no constitutional authority for the government to select jurors. The jury vets itself. They can remove their own members for bias. The government may not, because then it becomes a stacked panel, potentially even of your sworn enemies. That's happened before, by the way. If you want to do a deep dive on that, I strongly advise that you go look up the Edmunds-Tucker trials. And there are various things that are said and written about that in the Journal of Discourses. And it's true and correct. This has happened before. So if you don't have trial by jury, then what do you have? Well, you're not making the government prove its case, because they can just charge you and you get extorted into a plea deal, and they say, well, we're either going to fine you $800 or we're going to fine you $400, right? Which of those, right? And this is the point. With all this mass media stuff about these media allegations that don't confine themselves to grand jury procedures, is they can just use the court of public opinion. If the government can get rid of you by sending a mob with torches and pitchforks to your house to burn it down, then they don't even need to pretend to have a trial for you. They don't even need to do that. Yeah. But also, if they have all these things like criminal enhancements, like our legislature has been installing, which is a form of double jeopardy, if they have different rules on the admissibility of evidence, which Senator Brady Brammer here in the state of Utah has also been doing, that to say that mere rumors can become admissible evidence and so on, or a non-conviction can be used as propensity evidence that you indeed in fact do something, which is also double jeopardy, completely unconstitutional. One of the many things that I would testified against in this last legislative session here. And so we need to push back against this, right? So are you getting the picture here? Because a jury can tell them no. If you actually put a person on trial and you say you're accused of violating curfew, they could prove that you do it, that you did it. You could have all these witnesses and like all this video footage and whatever, and the jury's just like, it's a bad law. That's unconstitutional. We acquit. Not guilty, Your Honor. And they can even provide a rationale as to why not. And this is what I noticed too with these county attorney candidates. There's a third candidate, and I had this interesting conversation with him as well. He had the most prosecutorial experience out of the three, and so I asked him this question because he was still in favor of plea deals because of efficiency. And I said, how many cases of judicial review have you been involved with in your lengthy prosecutorial career? Can you guess? Just two. And that's what happens when you don't have a jury to hear the case. Because there's no incentive. There's no pressure on the judge to say this is a bad law if the jury acquits. But you can see how powerful this is. If we actually start holding trial by an impartial jury and the juries start acquitting people over all these dumb laws, all these unconstitutional and immoral laws, bad taxes potentially even. Can I catch your ear on that? Then what's going to happen? Well, they're making the judge look bad. They're making the prosecutor look bad, which is why they try their hardest to make the jury look bad, to make juries look arbitrary and like, oh, well, you can't trust a jury because it's like the flip of a coin. I'm like, you know what? I'd sooner trust my life and my fate to the flip of a coin than to a corrupt or biased judge. That's a very close paraphrasing of Thomas Jefferson right there, by the way. And it's true. And juries do better than a coin toss, and they do better than a corrupt judge for sure. So it's the best system we have. And it originates with the 12 apostles, according to the Constitutional Convention, the delegates in the state of Utah anyway, and various others. But I would like to have that safeguard, even if not every juror is the brightest crayon in the box. You know, if you teach people that, yes, you can decide matters of law, that's what the founding fathers said. The jury is capable of, it's authorized to hear matters of law as well as fact and to decide the law, which means if you have a constitutional challenge, you say this law is unconstitutional, the jury can say, we agree. Yeah, insurance mandates are unconstitutional. Mask mandates are unconstitutional. It's not pursuant to an enumerated power. If you can persuade a reasonable panel of your peers to acquit you, then you're not guilty, right? This is how you actually jumpstart judicial review, because then the judge looks bad. The prosecutor looks bad. The legislature now looks bad because, hey, there's a dumb law. Why are you spending our tax dollars going after people on this? And again, it would start to hit us where it hurts in our pocketbooks because we've been paying for these trials, and we're like, why? It's a bad law. And ultimately, the legislature could not resist that. So this is how you say no to the government. It's irresistible, and they can't say no to your saying no. That's jury nullification in a nutshell. We absolutely need it. It's not just a buzzword. I hope I've explained sufficiently well how this works and how we can exercise it. It's vitally important, by the way, that we make the government prove its case every time, and that we follow grand jury procedures to prevent witch hunts. Because the SRA stuff in Utah is at its core, it's a witch hunt. Same thing with the Epstein files. No matter how convincing, how compelling the news media or social media with deep pockets that are connected with the government, all these state-sponsored psyops, no matter how much they can throw these sob stories and stuff at people, that's still not proof of guilt. The only way you can prove guilt of any infamous crime is you got to go testify to a grand jury. So anybody who's actually had something wrong happen, you got to go testify to an impartial grand jury, and the government can't gatekeep them, right? And then the grand jury needs to agree that there's probable cause before they can even take it to trial. I know it sounds really fussy and delayed and maybe even bureaucratic to some people, but this is common sense. Maybe it's not so common anymore. But you can't just go and weaponize the government against people just because you said so, or just because you got hurt, or just because you're sad. And I understand there are real victims out there. The government's complicity in binding and gagging and obscuring the grand jury means that they're the ones who are abetting that. Our own government, state and national, yes, and county too, is 100% on board with all of the real abusers. And here's the proof. They're not following due process. They're not letting people come and testify to grand juries. They're not letting the grand jury be an impartial body that can do its job before government officials go and make announcements that someone's being investigated over such and such heinous thing. Right? We're not making the government do that. Therefore, our government's complicit with that. Do the real perpetrators want to continue to conceal and thwart the power of grand juries? Yes, they do. Because if a real citizen panel, grand jury, not gate kept by the government, is ever once impaneled in the state of Utah, then you could begin to hold real perpetrators accountable. That's not going to happen in the current political climate. And the current political climate does not change as quickly as voting one partisan in or out, because both parties are doing this. They are both complicit with this. It's that deep. These are Republican county attorney candidates, and the Republican county attorney, and the Republican sheriff, and the Republican legislators in Utah and nationally. They're totally cool with real perpetrators continuing to get away with it because they're not allowing grand juries to convene. And if a politician ever comes to you with that lip service and says, well, I'm going to let grand juries convene, just like the whole QAnon thing, Donald Trump, think about that one. It's a virtual guarantee that that's going to be a fake panel, because you can nominally convene a grand jury as long as the government can stack it, right? You can nominally hold an election as long as they can stack it. You can nominally hold a trial jury as long as they can stack it, as long as they can determine who goes on that panel. If we're not watching them, if we're not vetting them, who is? We've outsourced that trust to the government. And it's the same government that dismantled those rights in the first place. So you cannot have an expectation of justice under these circumstances. So I'm sorry I don't have better news. I don't have like a magic fairy wand solution that just says, oh, just give lip service to grand juries and trial juries enough, and then therefore we'll have them overnight. David Levitt did that on the trial jury side, at least. And what did our government do? They continued to erase trial by jury. And so if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. You are likely going to be scammed by your own government in the near future over these SRA allegations and so on. And it's likely going to be in part fueled by this backlash, which is part of the reason why I'm warning you right now. There's such a thing as a counterfeit grand jury. There's such a thing as a counterfeit trial jury. Again, look up the Edmunds Tucker trials. I've been to the state archives where they have the jury oaths that were signed by the jurors before they were allowed to serve on a jury in these criminal cases. They modified, they altered, they reduced the standards of evidence in those cases. They stacked the juries with the sworn enemies of the accused because they imposed a religious test oath that functionally barred the jurors from being of the same religion as the accused. How's that for voir dire? How's that for, impartial jury? So any one of those aspects could be damaged, and that would invalidate the trial. I'm just saying that right now because it's true. If they don't follow the constitutional due process, and it's really not that hard to follow, they just got to have a will to do it. And if they don't follow it, after it's been clearly outlined and made known to them what their duty is, the only ostensible way I can figure that they're not following is because they don't have the will to follow it. So that's on the grand jury side. If you actually want corrupt people to be held accountable, we need to return fully to independent citizen grand juries that are not gatekept by the government and impartial trial by jury of our peers. We cannot be impartial, though, as long as we're stuffed with all this statist media, which is why this is connected with the Federal Reserve and with freedom of the press, which I just recently did a thing on the Federal Reserve and briefly touched on how it affects freedom of the press. But if the government is taking your own money to build megaphones like this one against you, you're in trouble. Who funded Jason Preston anyway? I invite you to look at that. Okay, and part of the reason I bring this up too is like there are like influencers with thousands, tens of thousands of followers, sometimes millions, who are just making these really weird allegations. And this is one of the most common things that you'll bump into on social media. I guarantee you either have bumped into this or you will if you're on social media much at all, because this is the biggest conspiracy psyop in existence. Let me just read to you this thing. Paul Gee, admin of Christianity versus Mormonism. During baptisms for the dead, older LDS men baptize each child almost a dozen times for multiple dead people. This should be illegal and needs to be stopped. I hope I'm talking to reasonable people, and I hope the people who are not reasonable never get a hold of government power. But let's not silverline this. The very people who are violating trial by jury and grand juries are the people in power here in Utah County, guys. They're not following due process. They're not following trial by jury. They're not They're denying citizen grand juries. How on earth are we going to get due process with that? And I have proof that these guys are listened to by our state legislature because guess what they've prioritized in the criminal justice sphere? Oh, let's go ahead and criminalize ritual abuse. What they did last year is they passed a bill that adds enhancements, criminal enhancements, if there is a quote ritual component to an alleged case of abuse. We're going to get into that pretty shortly. But like this is what we're up against. These are the principalities and powers of darkness. This is a spiritual warfare, and we should not be naive about that. And it doesn't mean that everybody who's a Latter-day Saint is a good person. It doesn't mean that everybody who's not is a bad person. It doesn't mean that don't go by labels because due process precludes labels. It cuts through them. And you have if you're going to prove guilt, you have to do it individually. And you got to have the presumption of innocence completely intact. Otherwise, you don't have due process. If you've ever played the game of werewolf/mafia, this is just a little pondering, little learning from that we can apply to this. So in Mafia and Werewolf, okay, so you got wolves in sheep's clothing, right? The wolves will pretend to be villagers. The Mafia will pretend to be innocent townsmen and so on. But what they really want is they want to weaponize, they want to use the villagers to lynch the innocent. Because if they accomplish that, then they've got it made. They're already going around at night murdering people, and nobody knows who did it except maybe the seer or the detective. But the way you lose the game, if you're the villagers, is you punish each other without proof. So you do have a disadvantage because you don't know who the wolves are at first. But I'm going to tell you how to identify the wolves. There's a foolproof way you can identify the wolves, and it doesn't rely on files somewhere or allegations of SRA or any of that nonsense. Okay, so the wolves know who each other are. That's important, right? Jason Preston, David Levitt, Mike Smith. Are they working together? I mean, last I heard, David Levitt like ran away to a castle somewhere, like bought a castle in Scotland or something like that, and lived there or something. So I'm not taking a position on whether or not he's guilty because I'm not a witness to those facts. And that's important because even people who have implemented policies that are adverse to me, I don't presume their guilt of a certain charge unless I have personal independent knowledge of that. Does that make sense? So if you want to lose the game of life, then you will punish without proof. That's a witch hunt. You'll be offing the innocent. You'll be killing innocent people, throwing them to the wolves. The wolves don't win by strength, but by steering the mob. How is the mob being steered today? Have you been part of a mob without realizing it? If you can stop that process, then we can begin to turn the tide against the wolves. And we will never do so until we do realize our own part in that and stop it and turn it around. The winning strategy is don't convict without proof. It's not just oh, look, this person has a pentagram on their building or something, and therefore they're devils. Like that's not how the wolves reveal themselves, because in reality, like almost nothing really is that skin deep. Like it's not superficial. You can't. That's not forensic. Like you're an abuser because you have this symbol and you have this religious symbolism, therefore you're abusive. Like that does not follow. But that is what, again, Senator Brady Brammer wrote into law last year, is that if you have this symbolism, then you must, and they get to determine, they get to decide what the training is that says what those bad symbols are. Or if you have that, it's bad, then we get to like increase the criminal penalties against you, keep you in jail for 15 years longer or something like that, or maybe execute you. That's exactly the direction they're moving. We should not be naive about this. This is coming for you. They're what you've seen on social media is they're demonizing religious symbolism with the intent of destroying you. And they don't have any proof that you did anything wrong. They just don't. But what the wolves are doing is they are steering the mob to come after you. And whether it's the mob burning down your house or having, a fake trial between you and the wolves, doesn't matter. But they're implementing both of those so they can exercise them at their own discretion and have plausible deniability to be able to go after more people. So it's by the methods of the wolves. That's how you tell who they are. A wolf wants mob action. He wants class warfare. That's Leninism, Marxism, Communism 101. It's class warfare. If you're ever participating in or witnessing class warfare, call out wolf, because that's a wolfish thing to do. If you see people erasing due process, cry wolf. That's a wolfish thing to do. And yes, there's a problem with there are people who are crying wolf or there are not wolves. So you have to be discerning. But you got to protect this here. You got to protect the people who understand what's going on. Please remember the presumption of innocence. It is key to your own survival. That's how you survive. That's how you win the game. And yeah, if someone's pushing, anyone who's pushing plea deals, pretrial diversions, diverting things away from juries, gimping the juries, you can know with certainty that those are the wolves. And a lot of people might be doing that even inadvertently. But this is how sheep become wolves, is if they blindly go with the flow. Before you know it, if they just blindly trust whatever they're taught in their government-funded school, taxpayer-funded school, government-run, then you'll be trained to think that plea deals are a good thing. They're necessary, and we just got to be efficient in prosecuting. And who cares about due process? Who cares about nullification? Who cares about stopping bad laws? And they'll always try to excuse it using some cutesy argument. You can see those all day at the legislative committee hearings and so on. But that's who the wolves are. I mentioned, I'm just going to bring this up briefly because SRA is one of the biggest things around here. Satanic ritual abuse, it's a religious label. It's not a legal definition. Is there a legal definition of Satan? Is there a legal definition of ritual? Well, there is now, thanks to Brady Brammer and his bunch, the Brady bunch. It blurs the lines between church and state. If you can now prosecute people over, oh, you have this ritual practice or symbolism, then it's like, wait a minute, there are punishments for that? That's criminal? Like, that's a violation of the Establishment Clause. Everyone who does that is a bad actor. This is clear as print, right? So, and abets these bad actors on social media, of which there's zillions of them, and they're state backed. This is a state sponsored psyop right here to fund and push all of these rotten individuals, rotten ideologies that claim you're bad because this symbol, you're bad because this label. God doesn't judge by symbols or labels. We shouldn't either. We should judge by fruits. And the fruits are, what are you doing to our Constitution? What are you doing to due process? What are you doing to the presumption of innocence, right? But we hear people all the time saying, you worship the wrong Jesus, Moroni was the devil, etc. Your religion is heretical / satanic. People will say, I have a persecution complex, but please read the history on this, for real. I was in line at a store on my mission. It's a sporting goods store. My companion needed to buy a new coat, and there was this guy behind us in line. He said out loud, very loud, it's like, I can't wait until it's open season for Mormons. I'm gonna blow up every blah, 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 blankety blank in one of them. Like, he said this out loud, like he's gonna come shoot us kind of thing. I'm like, uh, and everyone else in line pretended like they didn't hear a thing. Like, really? Really, people? And so, no, we can't let them get away with that. We can't let people get away with saying things like that or threatening to do things like that. And certainly not establishing by government the very means by which they can continue to let the guilty go free and continue to punish the innocent. But that's exactly the system that they're installing. It's that dichotomous system because they're no longer grounding it in juries. They're no longer grounding it in facts, proof, or evidence or constitutionality. That's how they get around this. And it is coming for you. What the devil gives himself power to do, he will certainly do if it's in his interests. All right. Here's just a little bit of the propaganda, social media propaganda side of things. I'm going to wrap up here. This is Hollywood propaganda, and this occultist in 1854 who invented the whole lie that these inverted pentagram, all-seeing eye, and the symbols of Freemasonry and Judaism and Christianity are somehow occult or demonic or evil. I invite you to Google that. Just Google Eliphas Levi. Like, you can even get a lot of chatbots, at least as of today. Maybe Grok's starting to hedge against that, but try to bury the truth here. But this is after the fact. This is after like the inverted pentagram showed up on the Nabu temple. It's like this ex-Freemason, Eliphas Levi made this up after the fact. It's a fiction. And it's designed as part of this overarching scheme to weaponize mobs to come after us. Exactly like there were all these people who showed up at the Savior's sham trial to condemn him. And Pilate or Herod, I forget which, says, "See what all these witnesses have to say against thee. Don't you have anything to say about it?" It's like, but their witness agreed not together. And they'll pretend that it agrees together. And this is part of the conditioning we've been fed is, oh, but the use of the use of this symbol, that's consistent. And it's like, no, this is propaganda. That's not actually evidence of any wrongdoing. And Senator Brady Rammer was caught in the legislative session pushing this kind of rhetoric. We should not stand for it. You're a criminal because really, what does that have to do with anything? It has nothing to do with those things. It's just dishonest. And for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this is in our own articles of faith. Men will be punished for their own sins, not for anyone else's. So individual accountability, we need to demand this. This is the call to action here. We need to every time demand trial by jury, because if we don't, we're not exercising our rights. We're choosing to abet the lie that we should be ignorant of our rights and we shouldn't exercise them. And yeah, they're going to try to punish us for exercising our rights. That's true. But do you think you're going to persuade them to return to constitutionality without actually stating what that is and saying, I demand it? I don't think that's possible. I don't think it is possible to return to constitutionality unless we're constantly talking about this, teaching it, and helping others to understand it. Another important rule of thumb is you don't accuse classes of people. There are all these labels in our society. I've seen this so many times. Oh, all trans people are murderers, or all, and they usually omit the all, but like all cops are blanks, anything like that. Just don't do it, because that's class warfare, which is the key tenet of Marxism. It's designed to cause warfare. Class warfare is warfare. It is the cause of warfare. If we were not accusing the innocent, if we don't violate the presumption of innocence, then there would be no wars. We're being, and this touches massively on foreign policy as well. Oh, the people of Iran are bad. Oh, Israel is bad. It's like, just stop that. Stop speaking and thinking that way, because all accountability is individual, and our own Constitution says so. You can't prosecute anybody. You can't fine them for $1 without due process. That's important. And in classes, I understand it's super easy to just fall into the partisan mudslinging and the label warfare. The prophets have urged us not to throw labels around at people um, as a condemnation. Please differentiate between behaviors and labels. But we've already seen this change our laws. For example, there are pre-conviction labels in our legal code right now. And there were new bills being pushed in this last legislative session that would differentiate perpetrator from victim. I'm sorry, but until the jury has issued its verdict, you don't actually have a right to say who is the perpetrator and who is the victim in any official capacity, because that determination has not yet been made. That is a presumption of guilt. Am I super clear about that? It is morally wrong to have any government entity or ourselves, if we're doing it ignorantly, label someone as the perpetrator or the victim until the jury has issued its verdict, or we need to have personal knowledge of it. We got to be a witness if we're going to try to contradict that. So don't accuse classes of people. All accountability is individual. Don't accuse ignorantly. Oh, I know this guy's guilty because I read about it on social media. That's mob action. That's how you get rid of juries. So how you restore juries is to reverse that. By their fruits you shall know them, not by the labels. And again, it's like this is the cause of all wars. It's like, oh, I know he's guilty. He's a Mormon. I know he's guilty. He's a Jew. Like, he's guilty. He's a Muslim. He deserves to die. He's an illegal immigrant. Stop doing that. So with our freedom of speech, with our freedom of the press, with our means, with what we do, we need to change all of this. And yeah, this is who's behind it. So the actual perpetrators are the only ones really, who seem to benefit from punishing the innocent and from letting the guilty go free. And that's why we need trial by jury, because that would actually start the process of putting a stop to that. And I'm just going to go ahead and give a shameless plug here because I don't mingle church and state in any official capacity. I do have my religious beliefs. They're privately held. I have a right to share them publicly. I don't have a right to uh, promote an establishment of religion using any public office. I'm not going to do that. But I'm teaching you this by way of principle, just to say that loving your enemies, this teaching of Jesus, is the same thing as the presumption of innocence that is required by our Constitution. And loving your enemies is, in fact, vital to your own survival. Because if you don't love your enemies enough to afford them with due process, then your enemies will come after you without due process. And it's just like that line in Man for All Seasons where Roper, this hot-headed dude, wants to go after his enemies and punish them. He said, I would cut down every law in England to go against the devil. And then Sir Thomas More responds to him and says, well, with all the laws cut down, where then will you hide? Yes, I would give the devil the benefit of the law for my own safety's sake. And it's like this poem from Martin Niemöller. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And I might add here, then they came for the Mormons, and I did not speak out because I was not a Mormon, right? Or a Democrat, or of whatever label. Here's exactly where that leads. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This is where this leads. If we allow defendant rights to be erased, we will be destroyed. This also has everything to do with Roe v. Wade and why abortion is still legal in our state. And I'm going to be going over that next week because my petition to the United States Supreme Court does expose how that happened and how that's still happening, the mechanisms secret combinations use to enforce this. And it's completely unconstitutional. And I've debunked and exposed it. I've documented it right for you to see. This is my petition to the United States Supreme Court. I was appealing insurance mandates, which are a minor form of socialism. I'm not okay with any amount of socialism. If a sensible jury had heard that case, they would have said, yes, this law is unconstitutional. Your Honor, we acquit, right? That's what would have happened. The constitutional challenge would have happened. It would have succeeded. In my case, it would have put pressure on the judge and the prosecutor and the legislature to stop prosecuting people over this corrupt, unconstitutional socialistic law. I highly encourage you to download a copy of this document. This will take you straight to the Supreme Court website where you can find this filed document on their docket. It's a PDF file, and I go over those legal arguments. So you can see the process of how the prosecutor and the judge treated me. It's how they're treating everyone else. There are a lot of goodies in there, such as, how did our government get to invert the states' rights issue and weaponize that against the people? And the binding precedent that is the lethal weapon behind Roe v. Wade. So with that, I will adjourn unless there are some audience questions that I need to go find. And let me go check on the live stream chat. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. And please uphold defendant rights because our lives literally depend on it. And if we don't uphold defendant rights, then our government can get away with literally anything they want. So I'll be going through more of this in coming days. So thank